Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Weather Wonders. I'm meteorologist Leah Rodriguez, and we have a very spring-themed episode, and not in the sense that we're going to be talking wildflowers, but almost like wildfires. Today we're going to be discussing fire weather, and whenever you watch the newscast, you hear us talking about fire weather watch, red flag warnings, and for some times, or maybe even many times for the public, you're not quite sure how those apply to you. So what we're going to do in this episode is we're going to break down what those mean and why they're important to everyone in the community. And to do that with me, I have a very full set of guests here, and they are going to discuss different aspects of the fire weather criteria. So first off, we have Emily Allen, who is a Texas Tech grad student. She's also a meteorologist. Next to her is CC Robinson. She is a National Weather Service meteorologist that works here in the Lubbock office. And finally, we also have Megan Mahurin, who works with the Texas A&M Forest Service. And so while it may not be often that we can all find ourselves in a room together, I finally gathered them here today, and we're going to be going through all the details section by section, and each of these ladies are going to tell us their experience and their knowledge and deep dive and break down why fire weather is important to us. So first, we're going to start with CC Robinson and Emily Allen, and we're going to kind of discuss. Let's just start with the basics. We're going to set up what is the idea, what is fire weather watch, because in the process of distributing weather alerts, you always see a watch before a warning. A watch typically means that we're looking out for the occurrence of something to happen within a set amount of time. So, CC, for a fire weather watch, typically we see that happen within a couple of days, a day or a couple days out.
Yes, so we have a fire weather watch, and this is basically just when we're seeing red flag criteria, so high potential for, development of wildfires and rapid growth of wildfires. And typically we put out a watch between 48 to 72 hours before, and then from there we have a red flag warning, and that's just 24 hours to 48 hours before the time that we're suspecting actual fire weather.
Right. And so fire weather watch is, again, just telling people we might see something happen. I think it's red flag warning that people really need to start kind of making sure they're taking proper precautions. Is that kind of the best way to say it?
Yeah, you basically just need to know, okay, if I'm outside doing activities, I need to be more cautious with what I'm doing. For people who burn their trash, shouldn't be doing that. People who pull trailers need to make sure their chains and everything are attached properly. You just need to take more caution to try and prevent any wildfire spark, because on days that we have red flag warnings, if one does spark, it's very, very easy for them to spread rapidly.
Mm-hmm. And I want to say, sometimes maybe there's a little bit of confusion when we talk about fire weather watch and then we go to red flag warning. Do you know why those kind of aren't necessarily correlated? Because sometimes we get, for example, winter weather watch, and then we get winter weather warning, winter storm warning. So why do these have different names?
Yes. So when we first started doing these fire weather products, they weren't a public product, so it wasn't something that we sent out for everyone to see. It was basically just for the fire weather community, so the Texas Forestry Service and all of that kind of stuff. So back in the 60s or 70s, way before any of us were around, they came up with red flag warning, and the fire community knew what that meant. And then when we did turn around and start making them a public product, they just didn't change it. They just rolled with it and just kept the same name.
Okay, interesting. And so this basically became public product very recently then?
I don't know when they became a public product, but yes, I believe it is more recent.
Okay. Because I think we were saying kind of basically I think that kind of aspect, that little corner of fire weather specifically in the National Weather Service is something that's still it's still developing compared to, I think, some of the other, typical weathers that we deal with, like winter weather and, of course, severe thunderstorms and stuff. And so kind of so far, what has been your experience through the National Weather Service and kind of focusing on fire weather?
So I don't have much experience. I have actually only been at the Lubbock office for 2 years. The most experience I have is actually just this spring, working all of the red flag warning days that we have had. I will say I was around and working whenever there was that big fire in Seth Ward that burned down like 8 structures. I was working that day. I actually sent out the hotspot notification, and immediately the Hale County EM called, and we talked to him on the phone and was able to give him some weather information. But I haven't been here that long, so I don't have much experience, but I'm sure I will get some more in the next few years.
Yeah. We'll get some more in the next couple weeks.
Oh, yes, especially this weekend.
So, but you were kind of saying, so we have the watches and the warnings, but you were talking about something that the public may not typically hear about, is the RFTI. Do you want to explain a little bit about that for us?
Yes, so when deciding whether to put out a fire weather watch or red flag warning type of thing, we use what is called the RFTI, or the Red Flag Threat Index, and it's just a formula that we have that takes into account RH values, or relative humidity values, as well as the wind speed, and it just combines those and puts out a number between 0 to 10, 0 being no fire weather threat and 10 being historical fire weather threat. And we just separate those numbers into what criteria we're looking at.
Mm-hmm. And then based on that criteria, you said then you come and that's when we kind of see those outlooks between elevated, critical. What is the other one? I'm forgetting the other one.
There's elevated, near critical, critical, extreme, and then historical.
Yes.
So basically 1 to 2 from this RFTI is elevated. 3 to 4 is near critical, 5 to 6 is critical, 7 to 8 is extreme, and then historical is 9 to 10. And we just use those numbers. Basically, elevated to critical and above is when we start looking into a fire weather watch or red flag warning.
Okay. And I assume, so with kind of this image that we're looking at, so do y'all kind of coordinate? I mean, I know these come out through the SPC, but do y'all coordinate with them to kind of create these outlooks that we see every day?
So we don't coordinate to create the outlooks. They do reach out to us and ask about like what we're seeing fuel-wise, and if we've talked to the Forestry Service and what they're saying, what we're actually might be seeing for wind speeds and all of that kind of stuff. And they just take our kind of more local input of what we know on that type of stuff, because SPC works with all of the United States, so they don't know more of what we would know locally. And so we just collaborate with them, and then they come out with this just using our input.
Right. Okay. Perfect. Because, again, it's all going to come down to kind of teamwork and who's there in that area to tell me what is going on. And I think some of the best people to reach out to, of course, like you said, is the Texas A&M Forest Service. I think they're the boots on the ground, if you'd say. So when we come back, we're actually going to talk to Megan about her role in the Texas A&M Forest Service and why they are so critical to talking about wildfires. All right, welcome back. So we are talking about fire weather criteria, and with it being the springtime, you've heard us talk a lot about red flag warnings and fire weather watches. So now we're going to actually talk about what goes into that, what even triggered that in the first place, because it all comes down to the conditions, not just the weather conditions, but specifically what is the vegetation looking like, and who could tell you better about that than an actual lady that actually works at our Texas A&M Forest Service. So that is Megan Mahurin. And so you say you actually kind of cover a lot at the Texas A&M Forest Service.
Yes, so my official title is a woodland ecologist, but I also fulfill the role of the Wildland Urban Interface Coordinator, which is when we combine our urban areas with our wildlands. These are areas of concern, so we have a lot of programs that are specifically for these. We call them WUI spaces. And then I'm also a public information officer for the Texas A&M Forest Service.
Okay. We have basically a lot of knowledge that you're going to give us just here in the next few minutes. So I want to start, just kind of explain, what does the Texas A&M Forest kind of do? Which I'm sure is a very loaded question, but in your eyes.
It is. So the overarching goal of the Texas A&M Forest Service is to protect and conserve our trees, forests, and natural resources. And with that comes wildfire. So we are the lead wildfire agency for the state of Texas. And in that realm, we have a lot of avenues. So we do a lot of wildfire mitigation and prevention. So that's going to involve education and outreach. We do a lot of hazardous fuels reduction projects, and that's going to kind of be that mitigation component. We also are all hazards emergency response. So back during the Kerrville floods, the Texas A&M Forest Service had a very large footprint in Kerrville. So we do a lot of different things, but wildfire is going to be the one that we are most notably known for.
Right. And so you said the first one was kind of mitigation. So I assume that kind of one of the first steps to hopefully mitigate the start of the fire would be a burn ban. Would you say that's correct?
It depends on where you're at. So Lubbock County is not currently under a burn ban, and it very rarely is. And I think now, obviously, I can't speak for the people that issue these, but in my mind, the reason that we don't have a burn ban as frequently is because we do have a lot of agriculture in Lubbock County, and that is going to remove a lot of that fuel that would be critical in a wildfire event.
Okay. Very interesting. Okay, so it all comes down to you have to know the area, what's going on with the area. So that being said, then there's a lot of based on the area, kind of what goes into determining, like you talking about, like preparedness levels and talking about how critical a fire weather situation can be. So can we talk a little bit about kind of what goes into determining the seriousness of a scenario, talking about like vegetation and even like water and drought and stuff like that?
Absolutely. So, of course, weather is going to be a very critical part of that, but the other part of that is going to be that fuel. If the fuel isn't present, then we don't have fire. A lot of times in this part of the state, we're always going to have fuel. Our primary fuel is grass, which we classify as a light, flashy fuel. And what that means is even though there's not much to consume, it does ignite very quickly, and it has the potential to move very quickly with the slightest amount of wind behind it. So that's where it gets that term light and flashy.
Okay, very nice. And so obviously around Lubbock, we kind of don't see, areas like that where there's grass necessarily all over the place, but more in the more rural areas. And I think the fact that, we don't have a lot of big trees, like you wouldn't come to Lubbock or the surrounding area and say that there's a forest necessarily, right? So does the fact that we kind of have some of those smaller shrubs and drier grasses, I'm sure that plays an effect into what we expect to see in the spring.
It does. It changes the fire behavior, and it also it changes the season. So the typical fire season for a highly predominant grass ecosystem is going to be in the wintertime, whereas you're looking at shrubs and timber, their fire seasons are more typically going to be in July, August, September, during those hotter months when we do have a high prevalence of lightning busts.
So lightning would obviously is going to be a kind of common fire starter. What are kind of some other ignition sources that we can see like here closer around the South Plains?
Our most common ignition source is going to be roadside starts. Cece touched on it a little bit ago. Dragging chains behind trailers, flat tires, anything that can produce a spark on that asphalt is going to be pretty likely to start a fire if there is a heavy grass load in that bar ditch area along the road.
Okay. And grass load, what does that mean?
Grass loading is going to be the continuity of the fuel. So when you hear the term a heavy or high grass load, that's going to mean that the grass has had a good growing season and it's most likely dormant now and it is continuous. Whereas when you hear a low grass loading fuel, you're going to have a lot of bare ground in between those clumps of grass, and it may not spread the same rate.
Besides that, can we talk, I don't know how much public interaction as far as kind of the public kind of understanding the importance of, refraining from burning. But one thing we were talking about earlier is that, we can also make sure that there's not necessarily too much agricultural burning or even just trash burning, because I think that's one thing that sometimes people don't necessarily understand how quickly that can get out of hand.
In the past few years, especially after the Panhandle fires back in 24, public interest in wildfires has grown exponentially, which is both good and bad. But it is good in the fact that they are more aware of the conditions that are out daily. In the past probably 5 years, I have noticed a much higher push from our local weather meteorologists, pushing that fire weather data, and they're pushing it pretty consistently. So just the increase of acknowledgement from our local meteorologists, and then our citizens are starting to see that is changing the way wildfires are occurring in this area.
Yeah. Okay. And of course, as you said, we're trying to get more information out there. And you mentioned a very useful source, not only for, the public, but even some people that are like yourself that are working in the field. There's a very good website that Texas A&M has put out, if you want to elaborate about that a bit.
Yeah, so we call it TIC. That stands for the Texas Interagency Coordination Center. And this is where we house all of our data. So our predictive services, we collect fuel samples. This is where those numbers are going to go, showing the fuel moisture loads. This is where weather data goes. And this is how we determine when we're going to be staffing, where we're going to be staffing. And it is a little bit more in depth than, what you would get on your local news station. But if that is something that you're interested in learning more about, you can visit our website and check out that information.
When we come back, we're going to kind of, amongst the four of us, all talk about, just reiterate why fire weather is something that we shouldn't exactly just blow off all the time, because, it doesn't just affect necessarily a rural piece of land, because that piece of land is very important. And then also there's many other factors that can come out of wildfires starting. So we will have a full conversation in a few minutes. All right, well, if you're still hanging with us this episode, thanks so much for sticking around, because now we're actually going to get into more of the nitty-gritty details, and we're actually going to talk about pattern recognition and really talking about why it's so important to understand that spring is probably and likely the most likely season to see wildfires around the South Plains. So first, I want to start with one of the top 15 biggest wildfires that we've seen around Texas. And I want to ask, first of all, is anyone surprised, or just what are your emotions in the fact that the top one, Smokehouse Creek fire, happened, just 2 years ago?
Well, I'll speak to that. So I actually was working during the Panhandle wildfires, and it was quite the learning experience. I was fairly new to fire at that time. I'd only been doing it for a couple of years, and it's just one of those things that you can't adequately prepare yourself for what you're about to experience. You just have to live it. Mm-hmm. But I am glad that you brought this photo up. So talking about pattern recognition, the reason that our agency posted or pushed out this graphic is because if you look at the dates next to all of these fires, and you kind of you can look at two different patterns. One, obviously, being the drought of 2011. Quite a few of those historically large fires happened during 2011. But if you also look at the months, so our earliest one was in February and the latest one was in May. So all of those occurred during what we call our green up period. So this is the time where grasses and all of our other fuels are going to be dormant from the winter season. And as they start coming out of dormancy is when they start experiencing what we call a green up. So if you look at 2011, it wasn't there. If you look at the 15th largest fire, the Dickens Complex, that happened on May 5th. So during that time period, we still hadn't had a green up in May. That is how bad that drought was back in 2011. And if you also look at the location of these fires follow a corridor from the southern Great Plains. So the southern Great Plains kind of dips into the Texas Panhandle and some into West Texas. And this part of the state during this time of year is known to experience what we call a Southern Plains wildfire outbreak. And quite a few of these large fires happened during those days. And what that is a very specific weather pattern that it starts with a southwest wind, and then we have a frontal passage come through, and that frontal passage is going to change that wind direction, which is exactly what we had happen on the Windy Deuce and Smokehouse Creek fire, which is why when you look at the footprint of that fire, you see that it looked like it was going from left to right, so west to east, because that's the way the wind was blowing, and then that wind shift happened, and then it just started burning down. So that's kind of why this graphic is so important, and why this time of year it is so important to be cognizant of what we're doing outside, make sure that we're minimizing our sparks, and just being aware, wildfire aware.
Right. And I will say, so something kind of going back to weather is everybody knows, for the most part, in the winter, at least around the South Plains area, it's pretty dry. And I think one thing that really enhances that, and Cece can talk a little bit about this, is kind of the La Nina effect. We don't really get a lot of moisture during that time in the winter anyway. So I'm sure that only enhances the dryness of what we see in the vegetation coming out of the winter.
Yeah, so for our area during a La Nina, we get below normal precipitation. Currently, if you've noticed, we've had a lot of fire weather this past couple of months. We are currently in a La Nina. We are phasing out of it, according to our climate scientists. They're saying maybe by end of April, May, we might be in neutral going towards an El Nino. But currently, right now, we are in La Nina. And for 2011, like Megan was talking about, that was a big La Nina year. And that was one of our biggest drought years.
Yeah. And of course, so really trying to look at all of these correlations, for example, like where and I'm assuming, so the top 15 fires just happen to be, within that Panhandle corridor, because there's other fires that happen in eastern Texas. I'm sure they're not quite as big as what we've saw in those top 15.
Yeah, and I just want to highlight the reason they are so big in that top 15 in that Panhandle corridor is going to be because of that fuel type. So, we were talking earlier about how grass are going to be those light, flashy fuels, and they have a higher rate of spread. So we do have another graphic that shows during this time period, fires around the whole state. And East Texas did. During those years of drought, they did get a lot of fires. They just weren't as big because their fuel loading was different. So they have a lot of timber. That's going to burn a lot slower. So we fight fire a little differently in those areas. But when you have that grass fuel loading, it's just far more likely to have a large-scale fire because of that wind component. Right.
And so we are doing a lot of research into the vegetation, into the weather, how those two work. But now there's even, the field continues to evolve. And Emily actually is part of the leading edge of looking into that evolution of why fire weather is so important. So Emily, you have your meteorology degree, and you are a grad student with Texas Tech. So how are you helping to influence the future of what we're going to see, the importance of fire weather?
So right now I am studying the Smokehouse Creek fire, which was at the top of that list of top 15. And so my job as a meteorologist who is interested in social science is to kind of connect all these pieces. So we've kind of talked about how fire weather is a little different. We have all this collaboration going on. Like with severe winter, you're not as likely to see the fire service or the Forest Service, collaborating with the Weather Service. And then you also have the broadcast aspect and the EMs. And so just kind of putting all those together, it's a lot of moving parts for fire weather specifically. And so I have a lot of interviews that I'll be going through, kind of connecting those pieces, trying to make sense of some fire weather products that we've talked about today. So,
right, and just of course seeing the impacts and the impacts over time, because not only do people think that it's just wildfires, it's just trees and grasses burning. As we've seen with a lot of the major fire outbreaks, we're seeing a lot of agricultural damage, and just seeing what else can we do to help people as this field evolves. And but there's also the Texas A&M Forest Service is also kind of doing their part in making sure, because as we've seen a lot of the fires break out in the spring, they do a lot of proactiveness in the spring. How do we prepare and get more hands on deck, if you'd say?
So right now we are statewide, we're currently at a preparedness level 3, which means that we are bringing in resources from other parts of the state. So we currently have a lot of Texas A&M Forest Service employees from East Texas that are here in Lubbock, but we're also pulling resources from out of state. So currently we have a strike team from Washington. We have a dozer crew from Wyoming and a dozer crew from Idaho. You may have seen the Washington strike team engines around Lubbock, and that's because they're here to help us out.
Yeah, and so, I mean, honestly, I think it'd be pretty cool to see a whole nother set of teams. And you said they brought their fire trucks in?
Yes, so strike team engines will travel with their equipment. I believe that the Wyoming dozer also brought their own transport and bulldozer in. The Idaho dozer crew is staffing one of our bulldozers. So you'll typically see a lot of, when we have high fire weather and we're in this winter fire season, you're going to see a lot of not Lubbock fire resources here in town. You'll see them staffing from the hotel quite a bit on these days that we consider lower impact. So like today's going to be a beautiful day, not a lot of wind. So they'll typically be staffing from their hotel. We currently do not have an office big enough to house the amount of resources that we have. We currently have over 75 resources in an office that's built for 7 people. So that's why you'll see that. But on those higher fire weather days, we will have them at the office in the parking lot in their trucks ready to go.
Yeah, and ready to go, and specifically at a certain time too, because we all know when it gets hot, that's when things kind of get even more important to stay on top of.
Yes, we typically call that our witching hour. It starts at 2 p.m. That's when our temperatures are creeping up to their highest of the day, and our relative humidities are at their lowest, and this is when our local fire departments start running the majority of their outdoor fires is during witching hour.
Yeah, so while everyone else is sitting in the office at 2 o'clock thinking the day is almost over, for your guys, their day is just beginning.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that we have covered a lot of why fire weather is important, what we're doing to making sure the public stays in the loop with making sure they know why it's important to yield to these watches and to these warnings, and then also just what's being done behind the scenes, because there is a lot of research and there's still more to do, especially with the huge wildfires that we've seen recently breaking out. So like I said, we'll have these websites that you can check out, you can find more information on, but that is it for us today. Make sure you tune back in to another episode of Weather Wonders. Thank you guys so much for watching.